Greetings, Math 10 students. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Hawks assignments for sections 6.3 and 6.4. This video is by popular demand. I've had quite a few people asking for help with these sections and asking if I would record myself going over some of the questions in here. So I'm going to try to do as much of these as I can, which means this might end up being a longer video and I might end up having to split it in two. So let's take a look at section 6.3 first, and we're going to take a look at the questions that have to do with this slope-intercept form. If you're starting from scratch and don't have a clue what that's about, please make sure you check out the other videos recently updated for this particular playlist. So here we're given an equation, y equals 3x plus 7, and they're going to ask us to do a few things with this equation. So first of all, remember that this is in the slope-intercept form. When you see an equation like this, you can always think about it as being in that slope-intercept form, and that means the number that's the coefficient of x here, that's always your slope. So whatever is touching the x is typically going to be your slope. And then the number that's off on its own that's not touching the x is going to be your intercept. So you'll see in the video I uploaded having to do with this section that I put some definitions behind those things. I mentioned that the slope is the coefficient of x, it's the rate of change, and then the intercept is the number that's not touching x. So here, this is essentially just a fill in the blanks. They want to make sure that you know those definitions. So the slope here is 3, the intercept is the 7. Now, this undefined button gets people sometimes. Don't worry about that. We're not going to deal with that in Math 10. Essentially, as long as you have a y equals, as long as it's a valid slope-intercept equation, you'll always have a slope. It'll never be undefined. Undefined happens when you're trying to find the slope and you end up with a denominator of 0. You can never divide by 0, so that's bad news. That won't happen for any of the questions in this section or in this class, but you might see it come up in Math 102. So the next step here, they're asking me to take that y-intercept and plot it. Well, if you look at my previous answer, that y-intercept was 0, 7, and it's easy enough to plot that on the graph. 0 for x means I don't go left or right at all, and 7 for y means I go up 7. Take a look at the 6.1 video if you need help plotting points. Typically, though, that y-intercept will always be on the y-axis. You can typically depend on just going straight up or down by the amount that you're given by that intercept. All right, the next part is going to ask me to draw one more point here. Now, you can do this a lot of different ways. One way that you can do this is by just making the XY table that we know and love from section 6.2 and 6.1. If you had a fine time doing those and if you feel like you're confident with that process, go ahead and just do it that way. So that's fine. We have y equals 3x plus 7 is our formula, and you can pick any number you want as your input other than 0 because we've already used that. So let's just go ahead and go with 1, for instance, as our x. So we get y equals, oops, that's kind of, I'm going to type that since it's too big. Y equals 3 times 1 plus 7, and 3 times 1 is 3 plus 7 would give me 10. So 1 for x and 10 for y would be my second point, over 1 up 10. Now, I will mention there's a second way that you can find this particular point, and I'm going to do this by copying and pasting this graph here so that you can see what I'm doing with a little pen. So starting with that y-intercept, since my slope, if I look at the previous step, was 3, if I write that as a fraction, 3 over 1, the slope as a fraction should always be your rise over your run. In other words, it's how far the y's change over how far the x's change. So the top number 3 is telling me how far to go up, since that's a y value, and the bottom number of 1 is telling me how far to go to the right from that y-intercept. And indeed, if I go up from here 1, 2, 3 points, and I run to the right 1 point, I'll get to my second point that I just plotted. So that's another option. If you like that method, you're more than welcome to use it for this particular type of graphing question. It will work as well, and it's a little bit quicker once you get used to it. So let's take a look at another example, sort of like this one, but a little bit weirder. So I'm going to see if I can find the one I'm looking for here. I'm going to skip through. Don't worry, I'm going to come back to some of these other oddball questions. Oh, that one with fractions I know that you guys will want to see. I'm going to continue practicing. Yes, I know I'm not ready to certify. Here we go. This is the one that I wanted. So this, on the face of it, is very similar to the previous question. Let's see if we can do it. I know that my equation y equals 2 is supposed to be in that y equals mx plus b format. Y equals mx plus b, I know that the number in front of the x is my slope. Problem here is there is no x, so there's no number in front of my x. Again, undefined is never going to be an option for this class. As long as you have a y equals, you have a slope. So what's going on? If one of your two terms is missing, that means that it's 0. So in this case, my slope is 0. And that 2 is the number on its own. So the 2 is going to be your intercept, your b. Again, if one of these two terms is missing, you write 0 for it. You can think this is 0 times x, or 0 plus 2. The number with x is always your slope, and the number that's not touching the x is always your intercept. So you can tell which one you have by whether or not it has an x. If it's got an x next to it, that's your slope. If it doesn't, it's your intercept. So that's what they're looking for there. The y-intercept is, again, not too hard. That's just 0, 2. So I go over 0 and up 2. It's always going to be on the y-axis. Now my slope is a bit of an odd thing here. I'm asked to find another point on this line. So I can do that making my input-output table. And the table is going to be a little bit weird feeling. Let's take a look at how that works. You can also use the slope process we talked about last time. But I'm going to pick an input for x, let's say 1. And now I'm going to go into the equation and rewrite the equation, except I'm going to replace any x's I see with 1. So if I hit an x, I'll replace it with a 1. Y equals 2, and I'm done. I didn't hit an x. That's okay. I've got a y value. It's 2. If I put in another number, let's say 3, I get y equals 2. The input didn't matter. I could put in, 3,456 here for my input, and y equals 2 is still the equation because there's no x in there. So the idea behind this equation is that it doesn't matter what you put in for x, your y value is always going to be equal to 2. In other words, this is not going to go up or down. If I put in the point over 1 and up 2, over 1 and up 2, or over 3 and up 2, it's still the same. This line isn't going up or down. Because the slope is 0, as we see in the previous answer, this line isn't going up or down. It's a horizontal line straight across. It's never changing. The slope is your rate of change, and if your rate of change is 0, there is no change. Your y value is always the same. So whenever you're missing the slope is 0, it's going to be a horizontal line. You can also think of the rise over run as being a 0 over 1, which means from that first point I go up 0 and over 1. So I don't go up at all, I just go over 1. It's another way to think about it. But when you've got a slope of 0, when you're missing the x, it's always going to be a horizontal line. All right, let's take a look at some of the other types of questions. This is a question that asks us to find the slope between 2 points. I'm not going to do this one because I have this recorded in another video, not in HAWQS, but I have this recorded in the 6.3 video, so I recommend you go check that one out. But I do want to take a look at some of the other stranger types of questions in here. In particular, there are going to be a couple questions. This is kind of a strange one, but it's very similar to the intro video that I did. I want to take a look and see if I can find the question that just gives you a graph and asks you to come up with an equation. So I might have to cycle back through to find that one. Let's see if we can find it. Yeah, now that I want to find it, it won't give it to me. Here it is. So here they're giving me a graph, and they're asking you to find the equation. So that's something that you'll see I did in a video for section 6.4, asking you to find the equation here. And I'm just going to replicate this graph over here. And they're asking you to find this equation in slope-intercept form. They didn't give you much information here. This is supposed to represent the percent of U.S. citizens that use internet on a daily basis. And then this is supposed to start from the year 2000 and go to the year 2010. And they're asking you to find an equation or write an equation that models the data. So whenever you're asked to find the equation, I mentioned in the previous video, it's going to look like this. It's going to be y equals some number times x and then plus some number, or possibly minus some number sometimes. So we're filling in the blanks for the slope and the intercept. We don't have a lot of information to go on, but we do have a bunch of data points. And what I recommend you do for this particular question is pick the very first data point here and the very last data point here, because those are always going to be the ones that are clearest and easiest to read. If you pick something in the middle here, I know that the x value is 4. The y value is like something bigger than 60. Hard to say exactly what. So I recommend you pick the two endpoints because they're the easiest to see. That first one there, 50 is your x. So that's the point 50. 0 is your x, and then 50 is your y. So I'm going over 0 and up 50. So that's the point 0, 50. And the second point, I'm going over 10 for x and then up to 80, it looks like. So that's going to be the point 10, 80. And you can use the slope formula to find the slope here. So our first step is to find the slope. Now that we've labeled our points, the first step is to label your points. And I'm actually going to even label them x and y, because I always like to do that. It helps me make sure I don't make any mistakes like I almost did putting 50 in for x. Apologize for that. Now it's captured on video forever, so you can go back and tease me about it later on. So now that I've labeled those, I'm going to find the slope. And the slope is always going to be that formula y minus y over x minus x. So again, if you're not sure how to find the slope, go back and check out some of those other videos. But it's y minus y over x minus x. So here I'm going to start with the second point here. It doesn't matter which one you call the first point or the second point. So I'm going to start with the 80 just because it's going to make the computations a bit easier. So 80 is my first y value, and I'm going to do a minus for the equation and 50. And if I started with 80 on top, I'm going to have to start with 10 on the bottom because that's my first point here. 10, and then I'm going to do minus and then 0. So that's actually a pretty easy computation. You'll get the same answer either way. If you had done it the other way, you'd get a negative divided by a negative, and it would come out positive. This one will also come out positive. So 80 minus 50, well, that's easy enough. That's 30. And then on the bottom, we have 10 minus 0 is 10. So that should come out to a whole number, and indeed it does. It comes out to 3. So our slope here is 3. Should be positive because as you read this line from left to right, that line's going up. All right, our intercept here. There's a couple ways you can get your intercept. You can do it the way that we talked about on video, which is to write out your y equals mx plus b formula, and then replace the y, m, and x with the numbers from a point, and then solve. So we can pick either point. Just for the sake of argument, I'll pick this one here. And fill in the blanks. This is the harder way of doing it, by the way, so if you don't understand the way that I'm going to go over next, come back and rewind and check this out. So I'm going to put in my y value, which is 80, and that's equal to my m, which is my slope 3, times x, which is 10, and then plus b. So I went over this in detail in the previous video, and then you solve for b. So 80 equals 3 times 10, which is 30, plus b. And to solve for b, all you're going to have to do is subtract 30 on both sides. And so 80 minus 30 gives you 50 for b. So now I've got my slope and I've got my intercept, and I can just put both of those things in. My slope was the 3, so that goes in right here, and the intercept was the 50. So what was the easy way? The easy way was to notice that we already have the y-intercept right here. Anytime you have a point that starts with 0, that is your y-intercept, and you can actually see that this point is on the y-axis. So 50 was our y-intercept right there because that's where the line starts. So that's the easy way of doing it. But you can do it the hard way and it comes out the same. So let's type in that answer, and just to prove a point, when you have these questions, Hoxha is asking you to find the equation. So you're actually going to type in the full equation, starting with the y and the equal sign, my slope, which is 3. The letter x comes next because you need that variable, and then plus 50. And that's what they're looking for here. All right. I believe that is almost all the different types of questions in this section that are kind of weird. I'm probably going to split the video here and then do another follow-up video for section 6.4.